Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Helen Benedict and Eyad Awwadawnan in support of their book, Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. The chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase books from Literati throughout the event. The Q&A is available to you, however, so whenever you have a question, please feel free to submit that question using the Q&A. I'll read a selection of your questions at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available to you as well at the bottom of your screen using the CC icon should you need it. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. You can also subscribe to our channel to be kept up to date with all of our At Home with Literati events once they become available there. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or this morning, or this afternoon, or much later this evening, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us this evening. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's authors. Helen Benedict, who has been writing about refugees for over 10 years, is a recipient of the 2021 Penn Gene Stein Grant for Literary Oral History and the Ida B. Wells Award for Bravery in Journalism. She is the author of 7 novels and 6 books of nonfiction, including the award-winning The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq, and the novel Wolf Season. Her writing has inspired both a class action lawsuit against the Pentagon on behalf of people sexually assaulted in the military, and the 2012 Oscar-nominated documentary, The Invisible War. She's a professor of journalism at Columbia University in New York. And Eyad Awwadawnan, formerly a law student from Damascus, Syria, is a writer and poet currently living and working in Reykjavik, Iceland. During his 4 years in Greece, he worked as a cultural mediator, translator, and interpreter for various NGOs. He also published a featured article in Slate magazine detailing his escape from Syria. Please join me in welcoming Helen and Eyad into your living rooms.
Thank you so much, John. Hi, Eyad.
Hi, Helen, and thank you so much, John, and for everyone else.
Yes, welcome. So this is our book. We like to show off the cover because we think it's really pretty. And we were very, very thrilled and honored to see it become a real thing, because it started off as a kind of dream. We never thought it would actually happen. And usually what we do at the beginning is I'll read a little bit from the introduction, just a quick explanation that Eyad wrote the preface of the book, which came out of that piece that John mentioned that he wrote for Slate. You want to explain a little bit about that, what that preface is?
So the article was published in 2018, and it was it was detailing my escape from Syria and my trip to Greece. So you will hear a lot of details through the article and through the book.
So a little background, very shortly after we met on the island of Samos in Greece, and we'll talk a bit more about why there and what that means, Eyad gave me this piece, which you can read at the beginning of the book, because his lawyer thought it would be a good idea if he presented this essay he'd written for his asylum case, but he wanted me to just look it over because I'm a writer and a native English speaker, and check the translation and so on. And when I read it, I was just blown away because it was so beautiful and so moving. So I asked him if I could send it around and see if I could get it published for him. And Slate magazine not only took it, but they made it their cover story. So that was a great start for us.
Yes, it was. That day I did not believe that this is going to happen. I think you will know more.
Yeah.
How the conversation goes.
Right. So after the preface, I have an introduction which kind of sets the scene and explains a little bit why we've concentrated on refugees trapped in Greece, which is the subtitle, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece, and the significance of Greece. So Samos is an island in the northern Aegean of Greece. It is very, very near to Turkey. There's one point where it's only 1.5 kilometers away from Turkey. So it's one of the first places that people who escape by boat end up. It also has the second biggest refugee camp of all the island camps in Greece, and one of the very worst, one of the most overcrowded, inhumane, really quite disgusting places to live, or did at the time. And that's what brought me there, because I wanted to see what it was like in real life. And all the other journalists were going to Lesbos, which if you remember things you've read in the past few years, really since 2015, there have been the occasional international articles about conditions in Lesbos, but not much about Samos. So I wanted to go where everyone else wasn't going. So this is the introduction, a little bit of it. This is my friend Hassan. He is a man without hope. These were the words that Eyad Awwadawnan used to introduce his fellow Syrian to me when we met in 2018. The three of us were standing inside a foul-smelling, overcrowded refugee camp, surrounded by tents, rubbish, and flies, while a police officer eyed us suspiciously from inside his guard booth. Hassan knew little English at the time, and I do not speak Arabic, so Eyad translated. I turned to squint at Hassan through the sun. It was June and Greek island hot, and I had just failed to find a working toilet or running water, the camp supply having been cut to 2 hours a day. He gazed back at me shyly, a slight man of medium height, with a gaunt face, dramatic black eyebrows, a crooked nose, and a bold streak of white through his black hair. His smile seemed kind, but his brow was lined and his mouth pinched, so I took him for more than 40. He was, I later found out, only 25. Shall we go somewhere private to talk? I asked, curious to hear what had robbed him of hope. Yes, follow us, please, Eyad replied for him, and led us up the scrubby mountainside above the camp to the spot where he and his family had slept during their first weeks on the island. There we sat on a fallen log in the shade of an ancient olive tree, encircled by clumps of brittle yellow grass and litter, and gazed out at the sea. One of the many ironies that comes from installing a hideous refugee camp on a beautiful island like Samos is that from every angle the camp looks over a view fit for the gods. The northern Aegean stretches in its glittering turquoise and blues all the way to the sky. The town of Vathi lies like a tumble of sugar cubes at the bottom of the hill below the camp, and the lavender mountains of Turkey rise in the near distance, the very Anatolian range under which Homer had Odysseus glimpse the torches of Tantalus. It is hard to escape the thought that refugees on Samos suffer a similar fate, taunted wherever they turn by a horizon that promises distant lands they may never see, a beauty they lack the peace of mind to appreciate, and a freedom they fear they will never find. Hassan and the other refugees on Samos and in this book embody an enormous change in modern history. Not only are there some 84 million forcibly displaced people in the world, more than any time since World War II, and millions more since Putin invaded Ukraine, but they are fleeing a combination of war, civil unrest, religious conflict, poverty, persecution, local violence, and global warming, forces often inextricably intertwined, just at a point when authoritarian governments are rising all over the world and an anti-immigrant sentiment is rising with them. As a result, Many refugees are being persecuted, demonized, and denied their legal rights, not only by those authoritarian nations, but within Europe, Britain, Australia, and the United States too, the very democracies that are supposed to protect them and that in some cases turned them into refugees in the first place. The US's war on terror alone has displaced more than 37 million people since 2001. Some of the worst of this persecution is being played out in Greece. And one of the reasons for this is because of where Greece is, because it's a gateway, one of the major gateways to Western Europe.
I would like to mention one thing, like the only reason, maybe you have heard for the last 11, 12 years about the Syrian civil war. So a lot of us has escaped her homeland because of this. So this is like the first picture about why we were on Samos Island. Like when I was in Syria, I tried to, with my family, to move from a city to another because we tried to just stay safe as much as we can. But every time, everything goes worse and worse. So we moved from Damascus to Sueda, from Sueda to the north of Syria, to a city controlled by the opposition at that time. We stayed there, and you can see that the word's still the same. So what is going there is going here too. So as many of us, we fled to Turkey. The trip to Turkey wasn't like an easy trip. A lot of people have lost their life there. And we stayed there for like a year and a half. And as maybe you have heard a lot of reports and news articles about the situation in Turkey, especially like in the last few years. For a year and a half, I wasn't able to continue my study. I was like a student for 2 years in law school at Damascus University. My brothers too. But for a year and a half, we were only working, nothing more, nothing less. We don't know anything about contracts. You don't have any rights. So for like small reason, you could be fired, kicked out. I remember like one story, and you will hear more about everything in the book, not just from my side, also from the others, because most of them, they have been to Turkey.
Yeah.
So 67 people, including my own family, we took a boat to Europe. Why? Searching for safety and dignity. We were not afraid because we have heard a lot of things about Europe, like we will have safety and dignity. So we took this boat, and this was the first reason to be in Samos. And there I met Helen.
Right.
It was in 2018. Would you like to tell them?
Sure, sure. So my second day there, I just went because I wanted to talk to people who were living in that camp about how they managed from day to day to day. I was writing a novel about it at the time. And so my method was to go as a kind of freewheeling individual writer. I didn't go on assignment. I didn't go as a volunteer because I didn't want to be trammeled by anybody else's rules. And so I was in a stationery shop one day, and I was buying a map. It was just my second day there. And Eyad was in that shop. I just saw this young man, and he was asking for something in really good English and very politely. And I just thought, well, let's get going. So I just walked right up to and said, oh, hello, my name is Helen. Can I take you for a coffee?
It was like something nice for me, because like normally when you are walking around in the island that time, because there was a lot of refugees and asylum seekers. So a lot of local people, they don't feel so happy about that. So you will see them all the time with like kind of angry face. So it is really nice for us to see someone with a nice smile. And this is what was nice for me that day. I remember also because like I wasn't able to meet that day, so we changed to the other day, the next day. And this is what happened. The next day I saw Helen, she was standing, waiting to see the camp manager.
Right. Inside the camp, which had taken me months to get permission to get in there because the camp manager didn't want journalists in there, which it all raises everybody's suspicions right away, and because there was so much mistreatment. And that was the moment that I just read to you when Eyad came up to me with Hassan, and that's when we met Hassan, who is now the first person you meet in the book. His story is the first story. So over the next few weeks, the three of us would meet almost every day and spend hours and hours together in the afternoons talking about Hassan's story, talking about yours, and other people that you brought to me to meet, and then Eyad was the translator, so he was really helping me because he's bringing me lots of different people. And I'd say, I want to meet an Iraqi, I want to meet some women, and and he would help me do that. And it was just so moving. People were so kind and generous and so willing to open up about what it was like for them in the camp. And some of them also talked about their pasts. But we still weren't formally interviewing them. I mean, I wrote a few articles, but we were just talking, and people talk really, because I still had my mind fixed on the novel, and I wasn't really acting like a journalist yet, and nor were you, right? That's not really how we did the book. We never did really act like journalists. We were always more like friends talking to the people who we feature.
Since the beginning, since we start like meeting each other, and when I like start bringing people to talk to you, the only reason they want to talk is just to show the world about what is going there, about the inhumane treatment, about everything, the bad condition of living there. Like a lot of them, they had children, and none of them is going to schools. So they just wanted to talk to someone to draw the picture.
Right.
People out of Greece.
Yeah, right. I mean, because there was a lot going on. I mean, not only there was the crushing disappointment. You get to Europe, and instead of meeting with the dignity and respect and human rights that you have all been told all your life Europe offers, you're treated like a criminal or like a nothing. You certainly aren't granted dignity or respect. And then on top of it all, as Eyad just mentioned, there was growing resentment among the locals and especially among the police against refugees. And originally, in asylum seekers, originally there'd been more generosity. But when people were forced to stay longer and longer, and the numbers grew, and a right-wing government, or the Times calls the new government, it's not that new anymore, it's been in power since 2019, center-right. But when it comes to issues of immigration and refugees, they're pretty far right. And they got very busy demonizing the refugees and asylum seekers in Greece by calling them economic migrants, claiming them, they weren't really fleeing wars and for their lives, they were coming just to take the few jobs there are in Greece away. And so I think they had a lot to do with whipping up some of that resentment. But it meant that, as Eyad mentioned a little while ago, there was quite a lot of hostility and rudeness and ugliness going on towards people. in the town and walking, when you were walking around. The camp, we should say the camp was an open camp, which meant that people were free to walk, and it was just above the town, up a mountain. So people could walk down into town to shop or go to the beach, or just sit in a cafe or sit on the beach just to get away from the camp. And so they were mingling, with the locals and spending the money, by the way, because everybody got a little allowance, not very much, but when you could afford it, you would, buy some food. So it's not that the locals were actually making money off the refugees. So that was another piece of kind of hypocrisy that was going on.
I think now the situation is different than before. You will see how later. But these days when we start when we kept meeting, I showed Helen my first piece of writing, and that was my article. So as we mentioned, we were not thinking about writing the book by then. We just, as Helen mentioned, she was writing like some articles about the situation there. That's it. But with the time comes, we had this idea about writing something like Map of Hope and Sorrow.
Yeah.
How did we came up with this idea?
Well, it started when a photographer, for me, it started with a photographer called Giles Clark, who's actually a really brilliant photographer. And he had gone to Samos, and he was really shocked by what he saw there. Now, he's somebody who's covered wars and tragedies for decades, all his life as a photographer. He's been to Yemen, he's been all over the world. But he was shocked that a camp as disgusting and decrepit as that one should exist anywhere in Europe. So he wanted me to write text to go with his photographs. And that's what gave me the idea of going back more formally as a journalist. And so I started to arrange with Eyad for him to be my translator. And we would travel around Greece and go to some of the more remote refugee camps in the north, near the Macedonian border, which nobody writes about, to see what it was like in those places. And you were going to come as my translator, really, and help me get contacts. And that was March 2020. I had my tickets, we had the cars, we had places to stay, we had the flights, we had all the sources. And then, of course, COVID and lockdown, excuse me, and travel bans. And so I couldn't go. You take over because I'm suddenly cough.
By then, like Helen said, since you are like in Greece, why you don't talk to people and people you know who speaks Arabic and do the interviews with them, since like you know how to do that. Somehow I am gifted about this. Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, and Helen, she started like doing the interviews with English and French speakers through her phone. By then, I was transferred from Samos camp to Nia Kavala in the north of Thessaloniki, of Greece, in Thessaloniki. So that was the first time when I met Asmahan, who is also in the book. She is a Syrian woman in her 40s. And, like when you are surrounded in a place, looks like prison, you have nothing to do except like being friend with the people around you. And the only thing you can do, since you are not somehow allowed to do anything except talking. So I was talking with Asmahan and other people there for hours and hours every day. And the only thing we can do is just like to talk about hopes, about goals, about the past, about the future.
Yeah.
So this is how
we
started this.
And then I realized we could just be co-authors instead of my doing it all and Eyad always translating. So because also his English is so good, he can translate himself. So we each began interviewing different people over the next year and a half. And we spent months and months and months talking to each person, in some cases, years. I was friends with Hassan long before I started officially interviewing him. I think COVID also helped in another way, though, in a strange way, even though it stopped me going to Greece. It was this idea of doing it together as co-authors. But it also meant that when people were under lockdown, there wasn't much to do. So they were quite happy to spend hours and hours and hours going through their memories for us. Also, as we mentioned, in asylum seekers, it's very hard to find a job and first they're not even allowed to until they have all these IDs. So you can't go to school. So one of the things that's so hard about being an asylum seeker and a refugee in an unwelcoming country is that you're kept in this limbo where you can't do anything useful with yourself. And that's very hard psychologically. But I hope it helped people to be able to tell their stories. And that I want to bring up, I mean, all these stories are so dramatic and what people have gone through are so dramatic and their resilience is so impressive. But there's so much injustice involved. And the people in the book, and this we were touching on this earlier, really wanted to tell their stories, to push back against all the negative stereotyping and disinformation and demonization that was happening to them and that still is being leveled at refugees. They wanted to tell their stories. And we had two really important principles, right? To prove the way we did the book.
There is also like something was really important for us, and especially like for the subjects in the book. Like we wanted to make sure that we don't tell their story, my story, like just when we were in Greece. No, we wanted to tell the whole story. And there is a reason for this, because like our lives did not start at the border of Europe. As I mentioned before, I was like a student and I had like dreams to achieve. And a lot of us has the same too. So our life did not start here in Europe, as a lot of people think, okay, and back then they don't know how to use this or this. Like, yeah, I would say sometimes for some of us, our life wasn't rosy, but we had the sense of feeling that we belong to a place.
Yeah.
Memories too. So we wanted to write and tell the whole story of the subjects, not just their time as a refugee, because you cannot.
Right. So, and break away from that traditional newspaper approach of just doing quick interviews with people and only talking about them as refugees or at the moment of crisis, instead of their whole childhoods, their families, their everyday concerns that every human being has. So the people in our book are from a variety of countries, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and have very different kinds of lives. But because we wanted to tell their whole stories, we've given them each 3 chapters. So there's one chapter which is their home life, and some of them with childhood memories, things about their culture, their food, their happy memories, their sad memories, their marriages, or whatever was happening to them. First loves in some cases. And then there's flight, why and how, why they had to flee, and the journey during that flight, that really hazardous, harrowing journey. And then the 3rd chapter starts when they get to Greece and what happens to them in Greece. And through it all, we weave what's happening to them in the moments that we're talking to them. So you've got the kind of real time, this is what's happening to them now. And then in their words, what's happening to what their lives were like up until that moment. And then we had a second principle, which ties in with it, right?
Mhm. There is something important. Let's start with me and with the rest of us. Like when in the book, you will see that each word has been said by the subject, by the person itself, like his or her own words. And this is really important. Like we did not use the normal way, as Helen keeps saying about this and mention. What do you say? Like normally, you are a journalist, you are a writer from the West, you just come and write the story and that's it. You tell the story about them. But no, we wanted to make sure that we have the full control of each thing. So when I know that I have control of my story, when I know that I can say this or I can leave it out because I feel ashamed or I don't care about it, that gives us really a comfy zone. And
Yeah.
this is important.
Yeah.
So why we wanted the stories to be in the people's own words? I think just to make everyone has the
Their
dignity.
dignity, respect, what very things that are denied them so often once they become asylum seekers and refugees. And also to allow the voices to come out in the writing, because one of the reasons we chose the people we chose is because they're beautiful storytellers. And even if they're speaking English as a second or third language to me, or they're speaking in Arabic to you and then you're translating, every person in the book has their own lyrical voice, sort of their own poetry. And so the stories read very much like fiction. There's beautiful imagery, there's beautiful language, and they're very moving, I think, and sometimes they're funny as well.
Yeah.
So it's an unusual book of nonfiction because it's a mix of oral history and narrative, our own narrations, and then Eyad also weaves his own story in and out a bit with Asmahan's.
Because we
Because they have so much, discussion between them.
exactly. And as you know, like I am myself refugee, so we have shared the same camps.
Yeah, right.
And we've seen and witnessed a lot of things.
Yes.
Uh, would you like to tell like what was the first reason that we wanted this book? I think it is.
Yeah. Well, for me, I would say when the rhetoric against refugees began to rise and rise and rise, and it started really after 9/11. I mean, it's come and gone through history, but recently, when there was all this fear and hate mongering against Muslims and portraying all Muslims as terrorists because of actions of a few, that really outraged me from the beginning because it was so obviously unfair. I mean, none of us wants to be painted with the same brush as some fanatic who lives next to us, or some extremist who's from our country but doesn't reflect our political beliefs at all. And then when Trump was elected in this country and he instigated the Muslim ban and he started saying all those terrible things, unforgivable things about Mexicans and just demonizing the other like that, it just got to me because I've always cared about that kind of thing anyway. And it's partly because it reminded me of the way the world treated Jews after World War II and turned them back, the world being especially United States, United Kingdom, turned them back to their deaths. and then created, after the war, we created this Geneva Refugee Convention, 1951, swearing never to do that to refugees again and to always honor people who had to escape for their lives and give them rights and protection and fair hearings and not imprison them right away just for arriving and so on. And we're breaking that promise left, right, and center. And I think if we want to be on the right side of history, as is often said, that's not the way we should be behaving. Also, because of climate warming, we're going to see more and more and more people fleeing for their lives for different reasons. Sometimes it will be war, sometimes it will be drought, it will be starvation, it will be disease. And if we don't get how to do it right now, what will be happening by then? So those were all part of my reasons. And what about for you, Eyad?
For me, like I would say, after like spending many years and moving from a camp to another, like I wanted to tell the others that we are people who are no different than you.
Yeah.
And I guess like no matter what, like I wanted to, with the others, to highlight the situation there, the inhumane, the discrimination, like racism, of course, not from everyone, because like in each country you will find good people and bad people, the normal thing. So with this book, I think we have the chance finally to highlight about our life there. But like the other reason also, I wanted with Helen to change the way that the West and the people in the other countries look at us as a refugee, because Helen and everyone like her knows that we are not there to steal their jobs. We are not here to change your culture. No, we are able to integrate with you. We are able to work together and be friends.
Yeah. And we don't hear that enough these days. It's so we brought our own passions to this together, I think, and it's really been an exciting, eye-opening, wonderful journey for both of us to work on this together. We've learned a lot from each other, I think, and it's a really nice give and take, but doing this. Also, just as writers, we both love language, so it's fascinating talking about translation and Arabic and English, and the different ways we express ourselves, and then where we overlap. Yeah, it's been an endlessly fun. That
for also, it was challenging for us, not just the language and the beauty of the difference between languages, also the way, for example, like sometimes we will have bad connection. So, or sometimes you will find like you cannot see anything from us except our teeth because the light.
Right. Yeah. And that was during the first year of COVID, when I was relying on WhatsApp and my little phone to interview people. That was very difficult because there's a 7-hour difference between Greece and New York, where I live. And so it would be dark there usually. And also people weren't free to talk in the morning. They had to wait in long, long lines to get even like a little piece of bread and juice box, 3, 4, even 6-hour wait sometimes to get a meal. Just imagine standing in line for that long. And so they often weren't free to talk until later in the evening. So it would be dark. They would have to find free Wi-Fi by standing outside by an office or in a cafe, if a cafe let them. Not all the cafes would. And then when they also, for a long time, they had to wear masks, because the police in Samos would fine you 300 euros if you weren't wearing your mask, which was more than 2 months worth of the food of the money you got for food, much more. So whereas citizens were being fined much less than that. So there's, so it's hearing people and seeing people. It was rough, but luckily I was recording it all as well. And recording has a way of cleaning out ambient sound, so I was able to catch what people said. And then in the summer of 2021, I finally got to go back and see everyone in person again. And some of the people I'd only met on WhatsApp originally, and then I met them in person later. But that was really great, finally, to make it real again, human to human instead of screen to screen.
Like talking about meeting the people for the first time in person, maybe there is a question will come how we came to know our subjects, like the interviews deeply.
Yes.
For me, like I would say that, as I mentioned before, like after I spent years and years, and the only thing you do is just to talk with the people around you. So Asmahan and I, as I mentioned before, also, we were talking for hours and hours. We were having like tea in the container next to the container. So this is how I get like to know Asmahan very well.
Yeah, yeah. And in the case of Hassan, yeah, I kept up with him. I went back to Samos even after Eyad left. I went back and saw Hassan a couple of times. He was, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but he was put on trial. You'll have to read the book to find out why. And I went to his trial, went back there to go to his trial. And then he was moved to a little hotel in Thessaly, out in the middle of nowhere. And that was harder. I couldn't really see him then. And then there was Evans, who is a young man from Nigeria. So let's just go tell people who's in the book. So we've mentioned Hassan and Asmahan, who are both Syrian. Then there's a young woman, a 21-year-old, called Marsal from Afghanistan. I met her in person in Athens. She fled from Afghanistan. She fled the persecution by the Taliban with her whole family in 2019. Because the Taliban had taken over her village. Because they were in control of about a fifth of the country for several years before they took over the whole country, something that wasn't well reported. And they'd gone through an unbelievable journey. And then there was a young man called Evans from Nigeria, and he's a gay refugee from who had to flee for his life because of the homophobic laws in Nigeria. And I met him in an interesting way, because there are quite a lot of LGBTQ refugees in Samos and the other camps, and they have no special protection, and they're in a lot of danger because they will be, even though they fled homophobia, they've ended up in a camp often with a lot of other people from their own country who share the same homophobia as the culture. And so they can be in danger even from their fellow refugees. And indeed on Samos, quite a few of them had been horribly attacked and raped. But there was a volunteer there. There's a very good organization called Samos Volunteers, kind of the main NGO, that just a small one, but that's been working there from the beginning and is the only one left now, just about. And a young man called Dan Chapman started a secret LGBTQ support group there. It had to be secret because of the dangers I just described. And one day he posted on Facebook this heartfelt cry about how little he could do to really protect people from the attacks they were being subjected to. So I wrote to him, and I realized I've got to write a chapter about this. This is a very specific kind of compounding of traumas that's going on. So he put out a message to the people in the support group to see if anyone wanted to talk to me, and a few of them did, and Evans was one of them. So we started off meeting on WhatsApp because it was all during COVID, and then he was one of the people I I went back and met in person, and I recognized him from way down the street, which I didn't think I would because I'd only ever seen this much of him, you know. But you get what people are like, because we talk for hours and hours over weeks, months on our little phones. So that turned out to be marvelous. And the fifth person is a political refugee from Cameroon named Calvin. It's a bit older than some of the others. And that story is also very dramatic, but I'm not going to give any away now because we want you to read it in the book, and we want you to read it in his own words, all their own words.
And there is a whole chapter about women also, because it is a nightmare to be a woman there.
Yeah. So I also wanted to pay special attention to that. And so in that chapter, there are a lot more people who are briefly mentioned from lots of different countries: Congo, Eritrea, Somalia, Palestine, for example, who I talked to. And I went back specifically to talk to women one time in the spring. Yeah. So those are the people we have in there. So, and through their stories, of course, many issues come up, many other kinds of issues come up, to do with identity, with racism, with religion. You know, Evans, not everybody is Muslim in their camp. There is a mixture of religions. There's the prejudice against Africans and the prejudice against Arabs on the part of the West. Evans said to me, you know, I've traded homophobia for racism. And that was his initial feeling coming to Greece. So, but maybe we should talk too a bit about the hope side of it.
Yeah, but I just want to mention something before we go. Like, we would like to mention that we talked to more than 5 people. Like, there are a lot of people who wanted to be in the book, but otherwise, like, we couldn't, otherwise it will be too long. Yeah. And this is why, like, you might ask why we have chosen these people. I would say that I have chosen Esmahan because, like, I was touched by her passion sometimes, and as we mentioned before and said, sometimes you will find her wise, and she will say, like, wisdom.
Yeah.
Thing. And sometimes you will find her like a small child.
Yeah.
So she stood out for me.
Yeah.
And this is why.
Right.
Really hard.
Yeah.
Wasn't?
It was hard. It was very hard to leave some people out. They seem to understand. I don't think anybody was crushed about it or hurt, but it felt hard because it spent months talking to everybody, but we could not do justice to their stories and their whole life stories and have more than 5 people in there without creating volumes and volumes of books. So that's just what we had to do. So we tried to get a representation of different countries and backgrounds, you know, different economic classes as well. Not, you know, there are actually 2 children of doctors in the book. Regions and reasons for fleeing, and ethnicities and religion. You know, there's some representation like that too. I think to allow time for questions, maybe I'll do a quick reading from Marcel. Shall I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because
I cannot get enough from this part because.
So Marcel kept a journal while she was all the way during her flight and after she finally arrived in Greece, and which she gave to me. And I said, could I use some of it in our book because it's so amazing? And she loved that idea. So this is her message to to all of us. Do you know about refugees' dreams? If our country was at peace, we would never leave. No one wishes to live in a tent or a camp. Unfortunately, the Taliban came to our city and started fighting. Right before we left our country, we waited for the new year to come, but our new year opened with war and the sound of bombs, not with balloons. That night, we had no dinner, only tears. We come here to Europe because we hope to give our children a good life and a future. We want to wake up to the sound of clocks, not bombs. We want to sleep without fear. We want to hear only the sounds of our family's laughter. We sold our home and everything we owned. Now we do not have anything. I hope one day we can find someone who loves and supports us, who will talk with us, not hate us. Refugees are not bad people. Please stop hating us. Just put yourself in our place. How would you feel if you were insulted every day on the bus? Would you be patient? If you look, you will see we are like you. Some people see refugees as homeless, nameless, unclean, uneducated, and criminal. Yes, we are homeless, but not hopeless. We are nameless, but not weak. If we are unclean, it is because we slept in the forest, streets, and tents, but we have clean hearts. If our crime is speaking up for our rights and freedom, yes, we are criminals. If you do not want to see any refugees or migrants, fine, but please do not insult us. Sometimes only one word or action from you can make us feel as if our whole life is a jail. My mom always tells me, just calling someone a donkey does not make them a donkey. Calling us bad and unclean does not make us bad and unclean. Being a refugee means you are strong. You passed through a difficult, dangerous journey and still you are alive. You have hope, you have goals and dreams. As my mom also says, when you find yourself in a bad situation, just remember this. After every dark night, a beautiful morning will come. So she touches on the hope that we found in everybody we talk to, and that's so important about human beings and so amazing about them.
Hope what keeps us alive.
Yes.
And maybe it is important also to tell that in this book you won't only find a problem or like only the issue. No. Also you will find some solutions has been made by experts and organizations related to the refugees matters.
Right. So yeah. Yes, so in our last chapter, we have a list of suggestions about how to fix the problem, how to do better, and not only for the policymakers, but also for each one of us. And I take courage from the fact that surveys keep showing that the majority of people in the world do believe that someone who's fleeing persecution and violence, fleeing for their lives, deserves help and kindness from the countries that they end up in. Most people do believe that, even if it sounds from our politicians that many don't, including the new Prime Minister of England, by the way, who's got the same attitudes, anti-refugee, draconian attitudes that all the rest of the Conservative Party has. That's my little plug about my homeland. They're still trying to ship refugees to Rwanda. Anyway, I think maybe we should call John to come in and lobby some questions at us or whatever there might be out there. Hi, John.
Thank you. Hi, thank you both. Just first of all for sharing from this book and talking about your process and bringing it to the world. We don't have any questions from the audience. There's a bit of time, audience. If you have a question, to feel free to submit it. I think we have time for about one question that I'm happy to ask on behalf of our silent audience. Is something of a Greek chorus, a question for both of you. I'm just really struck by what you mentioned, this sort of kind of a motivating desire behind having these stories be told through this book about connecting people to the common humanity of refugees, which seems to should be sort of kind of prima facie, like sort of like it's something that we're able to easily access as our empathy for other human beings. But as Eyad was saying, it's very striking to think about how we are put in this position to think about the refugees as a problem, like an infrastructural problem or a political problem that needs to be solved, instead of that these are human beings who did not ask to be put in this position, and that's the kind of first principle to return to. I think when we in the States hear about crisis of refugees from the Syrian civil war in Europe, and now an additional war in the east of Europe, we sort of think of these things as very distant from us, but we can watch as well a similar thing to Helen, what you're saying happened in our own country, where people seeking asylum or seeking citizenship are moved around as political pawns to score points in an election season. So I don't want you to give away too much of what you propose at the end of the book, but I'm wondering for our viewers and for those who are watching later, for our little community here at Literati, if there's one specific takeaway beyond, hearing these stories and reading them and being present with them, what our community can do to be positively involved. I think it's often easy to feel like there's so much stuff I can't possibly contribute to something, but I imagine that's not the case, and that the book contains ideas for that. But if you're willing to share maybe one of them.
Sure. You want to start, or shall I?
You can start if you like.
One thing that really has struck me listening to the people in the book and also talking to Eyad is that the biggest thing that makes a difference to being able to start a new life in a new country is being made to feel welcome, is meeting with kindness. So, I know that there are actually a lot of refugees in your state, and there are more and more coming in at the moment from Venezuela, but it'll keep happening on and off. And I think if you happen to see anybody, you can smile and say, ask how they are and talk to them like human to human, offer them a seat on a bus. You can contact local organizations and invite someone for tea or read to a child, or, of course, donate. But it's that kind of welcoming look and kindness. I mean, Marcel talked about that a lot, but that she would say that is everything to us. That is everything to us. And that's a simple thing we can all do. It's not a systemic change, but it can affect another human being or a family walking down the street enormously, to just feel that kindness.
I totally agree. Just a smile is enough. This is, if you cannot do anything, smile is enough.
Well, you can do more concrete things as well if you want, and that's where our last chapter comes in. And by the way, I want to say something about the language of like floods of refugees and refugee crisis, because as our experts have pointed out, the crisis is not the number of refugees flooding, and they're not flooding either, coming in, moving. The crisis is a moral crisis in our own selves. That's the crisis. Statistically speaking, if all the refugees of the world were spread around evenly instead of being concentrated in the poorest countries, which is where they be, there's only one in every 300 people is a refugee. That is not a flood of people. Plus, there are many countries that actually need more people, especially in Europe. But there, America has a lot of jobs open right now. We have a lot of empty space. So, there's much too much made of how expensive refugees are and how much, and how they're overwhelming us. But if you really look at it, none of that is actually true. And in fact, the GDPs of countries goes up when they have lots of refugees. It may be more expensive initially, but then this is what happened in Germany. The economy got better, got stronger when they let in a lot of Syrians. So there's an awful lot of myths that even those on the left, or even the most warm-hearted people, we are receiving and soaking in without knowing it. And we do try and tackle those myths in the book as well. And then so another thing you can do is, if you hear your friends spouting these myths, or even just expressing worry that that an influx of refugees from Central America is going to somehow wreck up your town, you can push back with some actual facts gently and say, well, the key is jobs. If you let people get jobs, they're going to be only too eager to look after themselves and to integrate into the society and contribute to it, as Eyad was saying.
Okay.
Thank you both for joining us this evening at Home with Literati. Thank you for bringing this book into the world, Map of Hope and Sorrow. You can purchase it through the link in the chat, or if you're watching us on YouTube, in the description below me. Helen and Eyad, I truly can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us tonight, for doing this work, for continuing to do this work, and for sharing it tonight with our community. I hope to welcome you both to our store in the not too distant future, but we hope you continue to be well. And to all of our viewers, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great evening all. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.